Thank you very much, Chairman Hart, President of the JCC, Dr. James Armstrong, emeritus members of the JCC community and distinguished practitioners in all aspects of the construction fraternity. Thank you very much for the opportunity to say a few words to you. The only problem I have, as I recognize my parliamentary colleague, the Minister of Planning and Development, is that I have to apologize for the absence of the Minister of Finance this morning, who is down with a bad bout of the flu. I'm not sure if it's retribution or if you organized that as well. But I'm sure that you would have preferred to have been talking to the Minister of Finance, who's quite adept at attracting your attention. But I looked at the program and I realized that I had until 9:33. So if you consult your watches and just tell me how much more time I have left, I will tailor my presentation to suit. Failing that, I will take liberties with the clock. But you are a very domitable group, and I dare say high-risk taking group, to offer a microphone to a politician in the middle of an election and seek to limit him to 3 minutes. But for the moment, I simply want to share my experiences with you. Victor has shared his, Jim has shared his, I want to share mine with you, and that is, very many years ago, I was on the board of WASA, a young professional and bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and wanted to change the country, and I was very vocal on the board and very aggressive on the tenders committee and so on. And one day a particular matter came to the board and I was prosecuting it with great vigor. And Emil Warner gave me a piece of advice that came back to me this morning as Victor spoke of his long experience in this business. And Emil said to me in all sincerity, he said, you know the board is temporary, the management is permanent. And this morning, as Victor spoke about prime ministers and the JCC on the construction sector, I accepted that admonition, that prime ministers are temporary and the construction sector is permanent. I take no responsibility for other prime ministers except that I don't know how long my tenure would be, but during that period, I have great hope that those of you gathered in this room, given the experiences that we've all had, that we would find the opportunity to make our own individual contributions and to make the best of what we are engaged in. The foundation of whatever we're going forward with is that we are now not in a situation to be as forthcoming from the government side with the construction fraternity in terms of funding many projects. And we are also coming out of a period of the dreaded government-to-government arrangements where the private sector, the construction sector, has had some experiences of unimpressed onlookers. So let me just say what I expect to happen in the coming years, months and years with respect to your involvement in the national economy, as James pointed out. And that is that there will be some state initiatives to allow us to continue building our infrastructure with the expectation that as we do that, we would create the jobs that we hope will be created and build the facilities that we hope will be built. But one good thing we have going for us is that those of you in the constructors, at an earlier time, when things were a bit better financially, you have invested very heavily on the equipment side of things, and that some of you have also invested very heavily in the human capital development. And insofar as there are funding arrangements to create projects, that you are halfway there in readiness to take part in whatever we have to do. We understand very clearly, if we know Mikey Joseph, that there's a parallel with contracting, and that is paying contractors. we can't engage in projects if we can't pay those who engage in those projects. And my own background as a Minister of Government would show that I can tell you I understand that. When I ran the housing program in the 2004 to 2007 period, one of the things I emphasized to those who participated in that program was that if you work, we expect to pay you and pay you promptly. If you do bad work, we're going to query it. And if you do good work, we'll try to give you more work because we'll acknowledge your presence. And I think that principle would hold well at the level of the cabinet now and the prime ministership that I hold. But I must also tell you that I don't want to chastise the construction fraternity in Trinidad and Tobago. I know you operate against tremendous odds sometimes. But I'm anxiously looking forward to the coming of the procurement legislation, because if we operate that piece of legislation properly, and I expect that it would be implemented within the first half of the 2017, my contact with the Attorney General's office tells me that we are very close to the assent of that legislation, and we are preparing for it to become the operational template, which would have a significant impact on those of you who take part in the construction business and those of you who, those of us who manage public business from the offices of state. Because what it will do, hopefully, is to give a greater role to competition and openness. And if we do that, then we should have an outcome of a greater value for money, and we're hoping to get more done with the limited resources that we have available to us. It's against the background of an absence of that kind of template that a lot of the negatives associated with the industry and the fraternity would have created some of the problems that were mentioned very briefly by Victor this morning. I heard the reference to Eric Williams, and I might say the other prime ministers. And what may not be said by you is that the prime minister's position of those eras, and it's not for me to defend other prime ministers, but I'm simply saying my understanding was that a lot of what happened there was out of frustration from prime ministers dealing with what was in front of them. And the basis for those frustrating incidents or periods of pressure on prime ministers may have their roots still among us, and I suspect that the operation of modern procurement legislation, where there's competition for the offerings of state, and if that is accompanied by proper monitoring of the quality of what is produced, there should be little instance of the Prime Minister or the Cabinet feeling that we are being shortchanged by our own people and then turn to others to do it better. Because there are downsides to everything. If we think that we want something in a hurry, and we can't deliver it in a hurry with local resources, it is reasonable to look outside for it. And if we think that we want something of a certain quality and the local fraternity appears not to be able to deliver it, then it's reasonable to look outside. But looking out through the window and going outside for it brings with it certain negatives, as would have been brought to us by the government arrangements. So there are two sides to the argument. However, as we go forward from here on in, you will find this government taking the position that we are emphasizing a greater role for the local resources and our local input. And against that background, the projects that we are going to be going forward with might not be many, but they would be significant. And we will expect that the local professional class will rise to the occasion, and the local contracting fraternity and the JCC group will rise to the occasion to allow us to exercise that confidence in our local ability. So, for example, we have just terminated the contract with OAS for inability to perform. But it's not news to us that there was a view coming from this grouping that we should never have awarded that huge contract to one contractor, albeit one foreign contractor. And suggestions were made at the time, especially given the nature of the poor financing of that project, that we could have gone with a series of sections on that highway. We've terminated that contract, But the government's policy is to continue to try to build the highway to Point 14 as one of our major exercises, which means that as soon as we finish the assessment as we are doing now, in the not too distant future, we will be setting out to award contracts to finish the highway using local contractors doing segments of the highway. And that immediately would be a change of what we've been doing before. We have also put on the program with respect to our development of the eastern coast into Tobago, the Valencia to Toco Highway, which we expect to be properly funded by an IDB program. That piece of work will not be done by any one contractor. It will be done by a number of contractors for the reasons I've just given. And we expect that the contractors who will be on that project, the same way you hold the government's heel to the fire, we'll expect that you will hold your colleagues' nose to the grindstone, that if they get sections of that highway, then they will perform. It is, those of us in the political arena, it's par for the course to be critical of all the mistakes we make. But we're not the only mistake makers in this country. We are the only ones who get hired and fired regularly. So you expect that those two major projects and others, we would be emphasizing a role, a greater role, if not a unique role, for the local participants. There are a number of foreign, I'm not even sure if they're foreign registered companies, but I get the impression, having not checked it in detail, that some of these huge foreign companies are operating in Trinidad and Tobago as a name, Trinidad and Tobago so-and-so company. And insofar as they're to be viewed as locally registered companies, there are no restrictions to their participation in the bidding process. What we have to be careful with is that the bidding process is not manipulated at the point of award of contract, and then later on, the real price of the contract comes to the fore. It has to be that the way we interpret the evaluation and the award of the contract has some reasonable expectation that the price in the beginning would relate to the price in the end. It seems to be normal that the opening price is never viewed as the closing price. And we have to be particularly careful with that with respect to foreign contractors. Not to mention that we have an interest in not encouraging contractors whose raison d'etre is to earn money here and transport it abroad. We don't have foreign exchange to subsidize anybody abroad. So, especially civil contracts, where the major inputs can be met by local financing. I mean, road building, road construction is largely pushing dirt around and putting concrete in place with some steel and some human input. And you build some very nice roads doing that. So these are projects that have a very, very high local component, and therefore there's no real need. But if the pricing arrangements are open to other persons to participate, then it is what the tender process throws up. I must tell you that we have had reason to be concerned about the performance of some of our local participants. Only 2 days ago, I was looking at a position brought to me by a minister where there was an emergency piece of work done, and it was called emergency. And what the minister was pointing out to me is that once the work was called emergency, the contracting fraternity felt that that meant rip-off. And a bill would come in that bears no relation to the work as actually done. So let's say that the work was 10x, the bill was 10x. When you examine what was actually done, how many hours of equipment, how many hours of manpower, how many so-and-so was done, it was 25% of the market rate. And then in querying it, he said, well, okay, let's just double it for the inconvenience of the emergency conditions. And then you discover that the bill was double the generous arrangements. And then you ask yourself, how could that happen? And then you're told, well, it was an emergency job. Now, if there's competition and the procurement processes are at work, then that kind of thing ought to be eliminated from the process. And those who engage in awarding contracts would also now be bound by the conditions of the procurement legislation. So it is in those areas that we expect to see the benefits of competition. And of course, those of you who are wanting to get involved, we want to get to a place where your right to participate is the main right, not the right to get the contract. You have to earn the contract by virtue of giving a better price and better terms and conditions. And if you do that, then the rest of your colleagues should wish you well and hope to win the other contract. We are also in the process of embarking, or I should say we have embarked, because one contractor, NH International, has been awarded the first opportunity to take part in the private-public partnership arrangement, which is a very important arrangement whose time has come brought to us by virtue of the government's inability to fund the housing program. The housing program is a necessity. There are tens of thousands of people who are looking towards the state effort to access the housing arrangements, and the government's policy is to try to continue to expand the housing stock. And the government does not have the cash reserves we had before, up to 2009, where the Ministry of Finance was funding approximately a $2 billion per year construction program, which was being done by contractors. And that program had literally run away to the extent where an individual unit had moved from 350 in 2007 to approximately $1 million. And we start off talking about low-cost housing, which no longer exists. But in talking about affordable housing, even the low end of the program is not affordable for very, very many persons on the list. And in the absence of government funding, there is funding available in the national community. And that is where we expect that the financiers or local banks would be innovative in supporting their best customers or encouraging new customers in. And those of you who have equipment and personnel and expertise, you can put together programs, and the HTC will be flexible enough to allow you to be the carrier of these programs under the terms and conditions which we have laid down, which are that you will agree up front to the HTC as to what the unit cost is, what the cost of the contract is, the cost of the financing. You will deliver the finished product. The HTC would have its database and would assign those products to people who would immediately take on the mortgages and interface with the bank. So we keep the money moving from the banks to the contractor and being funded by the recipients of those units. Interestingly enough, the very first one we've had, authorized by one of our distinguished accounting firms at the HTC and one by one of your distinguished contracting companies, already is generating a lot of negative comment and suspicion and accusations and allegations, which seem to be the order of the day in Trinidad and Tobago. I just want to say to you all that I really would hope that we can get away from that and get to the point of giving blue ribbons to those who enter and do well and come out and show that it can be done. Because this government believes that it can be done, and we are going to set about doing it. And hopefully at the end of the day, when a short period of tenure, as described by Emil Warner a while ago, when that period shall have come, I would be able to say to you all that notwithstanding the difficulties we faced, notwithstanding the cynicism which might exist, notwithstanding the unsure footing that some people may be feeling, we have been able to take up our beds and walk in Trinidad and Tobago during what is a very difficult period. As we look into the future, we are seeing great challenges for our revenue earning quota. We have issues with production volumes, issues with prices, issues with market share, issues with loss of personnel, and great demands and expectations of the government of Trinidad and Tobago, because we are a country which depends very heavily on the government. Hopefully we can shift some of that expectation from the government onto the private sector, where we all can be held responsible and accountable for what we do. So thank you very much for the opportunity of saying these few words to you, and I wish you a very successful seminar.